Hey everyone. Okay, so today is going to be part 2 of the PACE route planning and mobility logistics series. So in the first installment, we did the initial route planning, your primary, alternate or secondary, contingent, tertiary, and then fourth, emergency or exigent route planning, your initial route planning, along with that critical thinking exercise, looking at a map that has some fairly logistically challenging terrain features and things like that that do relegate some of the aspects of your mobility and route planning implementation, your PACE plan implementation. Again, PACE planning is an acronym used for multiple different things, namely with communications and communications management, but it also applies in a lot of other ways, and we use it especially in private security, executive protection, and also the special operations community uses it this way, this acronym this way for route planning. So same applies for emergency planning, contingent planning, situation dependent planning, SHTF, WROL, all that stuff. So again, first exercise, you've got your initial routes mapped out, per se, okay? In this installment, we're going to talk about some of the tactical application, strategy, and logistics implementation for utilizing your routes and changing routes, okay? So the first bit is, mapping. Great OSINT tools out there, Google Maps and everything else. I'm using Google Maps as the example for terrain maps with marked highways, major thoroughfares, roads, and things like that, but you get the image of the terrain and the topography and everything. So with OSINT tools, this also applies for information regarding road blockages, disaster-related incidences where roads have been washed out or otherwise bridges otherwise damaged, things like that. All of those different things. So not just your mapping tools, but also other OSINT or open source intelligence tools that are available to you to utilize. And there's a bunch out there where it's user submitted information, people saying, oh hey, there's a traffic jam here because of an accident, these roads are closed off because of a blizzard and drifting snow, or a tornado has just gone through, things like that. So utilizing those tools too, and some weather authorities and state, local, even federal government is going to post information on some of these tools as well, apart from user-based and submitted-based platforms of open source intelligence for route tools and mapping tools. So that's one of the things you do need to implement, or should, as much as possible, be able to implement. If electronics are a no-go, then you're relegated to locals, your local network, your community, your mutual aid, and everything else, physical human intelligence and assets, and your community network to give you information on routes, as well as using physical maps, road atlases, all that good stuff that you should be using and training on as well, alongside land navigation and everything. So, utilizing open source intelligence, topography mapping, community and user-based, asset-based information to enact and enable your ability to utilize those routes you have planned, okay? So that's how that kind of works with that in that regard. Obviously, logistically, with security contracting, what we do, executive protection, what we do, and things like that, it is different because we have more logistical support generally. With the individual person, family, small Minuteman team, localized mutual aid groups, and things like that, it is going to be different. Again, use every avenue of resource that you can to give yourself an upper hand on utilizing your routes and implementing route transit and bugging out, bugging in, evacuation, arriving on to a venue for an extraction, whatever it may be, okay? So, logistical tools, mapping, user source, platforms, resources, local assets, community networks, human intelligence, open source intelligence, geospatial intelligence with the mapping and everything else. So a lot of tools there to bundle into a comprehensive package for yourself, not just for your PACE route planning, but also just operational planning in general. But for this, route planning and route action and utilization and movement and things like that. So another factor, the next factor we're going to move to here now. Say you're on a route, okay? Maybe it's your primary route of egress, okay? You're on this route, all of a sudden, and no matter what logistical resources that you have, sometimes things go wrong. As we say, Private Murphy is always riding shotgun. Murphy's Law, get it? So you're on your primary route. All of a sudden, there's a checkpoint. Oh shit, we need to tactically maneuver and get to our alternate or secondary route, okay? That's why the route planning, the initial route planning, should be conducive to where you have avenues to be able to get to your stages of routes, your alternate and your contingent or tertiary, and then an emergency one if you have that as well. I say at minimum always have 3 routes planned. The 4th with PACE being the emergency or exigent, again, is the most direct route, and it is, again, for emergencies, medevac, things like that. So being able to now figure out, oh, okay, intelligence is coming in, primary route is a no-go, we are going to have to reroute, leave venue, reroute, use our alternate or secondary route, okay? So then you have to implement that, finding the best way to get to that route and get moving, okay, whether it's in or out. Tactical driving maneuvers, things like that, you know, you get a little bit of driving skill is going to need to be involved when you're using a vehicle to move, okay? When you're out in the sticks and just doing patrols and stuff, and obviously route planning comes into play with on foot, you know, or an ATV or snowmobile or whatever too. Same principles. You know, if you know different trails and you can utilize those different trails for your PACE plan, do it. It's kind of necessary. With this, we're mainly talking about vehicle-based stuff, in just standard, you know, roads and the route planning therein. In the third part, we'll get into more mobility logistics and considerations with going off-road and other things like that. But for now, we're sticking to the roads, the routes that have been planned in the initial exercise, and other logistics like that, okay? So, primary route's a no-go. Alternate route, implement. Maneuver to it, and either egress or ingress, whatever you're doing, okay? So, these are exercises that once you have once you have your plan in place, your PACE plan in place, you need to practice utilizing these routes and your mobility tactics and things like that. If your alternate route, your secondary route is no-go, contingent, tertiary route, you know, and so on and so forth, you have to be adaptive. You have to be able to really, really know your routes and really get a good handle going out and doing some low profile reconnaissance and things like that to really chart, you know, look at these routes and figure out that your charting is good and that they're going to be really good to utilize in your PACE plan implementation for your routes. So primary routes, no go. Alternate route, okay. Now you have to look at your assets and your logistical resources. Is there any information about anything that might be bad here? Is the road washed out? Is there another checkpoint here? Is there an adversarial force otherwise that we have to deal with? Has there been a rock fall and the road's blocked? You know, whatever it may be, you all constantly need to be checking these things and utilizing your logistics support system, your network, resources, assets, everything all together to keep things running smoothly and be able to adapt to switching your routes, okay? Gonna come up with another map image here of another city that I've picked at random. This one I did kind of with pre-planned intent pick this because of the structure of the routes and the layout of this area. It is a grid. A lot of straight line roads, a lot of grid oriented roads. That can become a logistical problem, especially when it comes to SHTF, WROL, foreign adversarial force, domestic adversarial force, whatever it may be, and your route planning. Because of this grid system, it is extremely easy for your adversary to set up choke points and blockages, okay? So this is where it gets a little bit tougher, okay? And as it progresses, it's going to get tougher. And exactly how it will be in real life in a lot of ways. This can be a logistical nightmare just as much as having choke points of mountain ridges and being in areas where you are restricted in your movement to a degree, okay? Something to take into consideration here. So with this map that we're going to look at, it is a grid system layout. So again, much easier for adversarial forces to affect, to really limit and prevent routes of travel. So pace planning for these routes has to be much more conscientious, and you have to be much more proactive with your network and everything else to be able to outmaneuver whatever force is going on. And this includes natural disaster stuff too. Because of a grid system, it can be quite difficult because tornadoes, they don't move in a straight line, you know, down a road. Sometimes they do. A lot of the time they're cutting swaths and angles and curling and moving and things like that that is going to damage routes and cut off means of egress and ingress, okay? So what we're going to do now is we're going to go over to this map and look at it, and you'll hear me talking a little bit and kind of seeing what's going to be the most effective for your pace plan, route planning with this image. So let's get to it here. Okay, so here we go. Part 2 here with this map. As you can see, it is a grid pattern. This can be a planning and logistical nightmare based on whatever situation it may be. Why? Because it's a grid, especially for adversarial forces, SHTF, WROL, that kind of thing. It is extremely easy for the enemy, the adversarial force, to create massive choke point areas to either completely prevent or extremely limit access and travel, okay? So this is a very different map and modicum for your critical thinking process in planning your routes. Look at the map. Figure out what your pace plan is going to be for this map in this region. Your primary routes, alternate secondary routes, contingent tertiary third routes, and then emergency or exigent fourth route, route of last resort. Okay, there are some terrain features here that you need to take account of and otherwise utilize to your advantage or avoid for mitigation needs. Okay, so pay attention here. Also with this, and in the context of this second part of this video, this second part series video, what kind of information is your mutual aid going to be able to offer to you to assist you in not only your route planning, but also in action when you're on a route and moving, okay? So this also plays into your disaster situations and everything involved there, okay? So what are going to be some of your most optimal routes for your primary and secondary and everything, you know, to be able to utilize to either get out of the situation or get into the area, and which directions is the most optimal to go, you know, north, south, east, west, blah, 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 based on disaster situations and also with adversarial forces. Again, being a grid pattern, this is logistically much more difficult because it is so easy to navigate the whole area for the enemy as much as yourself. You may know the area like the back of your hand. You may think it's very easy to be able to utilize these routes and try and outmaneuver the adversarial force, but with this kind of system and this kind of setup in a grid pattern of routes, you are going to need to use your various logistics and intelligence and assistance support tools and your network to be able to work together and utilize that with your pace plan to the best effect and best advantage for yourself and your team. Okay, quite a different image here and everything, but again, prompting some critical thinking and some understanding that, hey, not everything is as easy as it looks on the map, especially with the factors involved in the situations, the variable different situations that you're going to have to plan for. A pace plan for a disaster, say a tornado, common in this area, a pace plan for disaster response and emergency evacuation for a tornado is going to be different than dealing with enemy parachutes that have landed and are now creating checkpoints at vital sections in this grid layout. Okay, quite a bit different logistically to have to deal with. So this is why I did this. So I'm going to leave the image up here for a little bit so you can kind of look at it, assess, figure out a good set of routes for your pace plan, your variable pace plans, and then again, consider your network, your resources, all of the intelligence tools and everything else that you need to constantly use at your disposal, apart from scoping out your routes and everything to figure out which are going to be optimal to utilize for various situations. Okay, I'm going to leave this image up for a bit, and then that'll be the end of the video. Thanks again for tuning in. Metal up. Out!